Welcome to the HEARTS Entwined podcast. In this podcast, we'll be having discussions around the secrets which attract lasting, healthy, fulfilling relationships, creating a healthy mindset, and what women should know and understand about men. Introducing your host, Lyn Smith, the Queen of Hearts, relationship expert, trainer, speaker, and best-selling author of the Cupid's Bow technique. Lyn's mission is to have a positive impact in reducing divorce, domestic violence, and suicide.
Welcome to the HEARTS Entwined podcast. This is your host, Lyn Smith, the Queen of Hearts. And today I'm excited to tell you I've got a guest, Fran Frye, sex counsellor, and she specialises in problematic sexual behaviours. And we're going to be talking about the differences and desires between men and women today. So warm welcome to you, Fran.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm nervous, excited, a blend of nervous and excited. So thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Well, one of the first questions I'd like to start with is, what is the main problem in terms of sexual behaviours that you see between men and women and couples in general?
Great question. I think there are a vast number of opportunities that we can grow together when it comes to relationships. And I do find that the fellas that come to me are often struggling or looking for opportunities when relating to their partner when it comes to desire. So there's a lot of desire discrepancies going on. And you may already be familiar with this. There is a spontaneous way of desire, and there is a responsive way of desire. And in cisgendered, heterosexual, typical terms of relationships, you often find that the man experiences more spontaneous desire, where he may be turned on out of the blue or come up to his partner in the kitchen and be ready to go. And the woman may experience more responsive desire, where there is some lead up, there is some curiosity and warmth needed in those experiences. And so I find that a lot of the men that come to me, they are experiencing compulsivity. So whether that may be stepping out of the relationship or having an attachment to porn in a way that's not serving them. So they are certainly looking for sex in other places because of their spontaneous desire and their compulsivity. So we work to align these two types of desires so that they can see each other on the same wavelength.
Yeah, and isn't that the truth in terms of the actual act of having intercourse as well? Whereas, men are usually ready to go straight away, and women usually need quite a bit of foreplay before they feel ready to go.
Absolutely, you're right. And in the same vein, Lyn, I try to teach the men that I work with that they aren't dildos. They aren't meant to just be erect and expected to be ready to quote unquote perform. There is some lead up and connection that is required regardless of whether you have a spontaneous desire framework or a responsive desire framework.
And I suppose it's not necessarily typically, I suppose generally it is the men that have that spontaneity, but it's not always the case, I suppose, in relationships, is it?
That's correct. And I'm in this work. One of the reasons I'm in this work is because I absolutely relate to the men that I work with. And I'm not sure if you would feel comfortable relating yourself in that way, but I certainly relate.
I think it depends on the guy. And probably the
Touche.
age or stage of the relationship. I think there's probably a honeymoon period where you're really hot and ready to go all the time, and then there's probably the reality of a long-term relationship where it's not the case.
That's funny you mentioned it, because women are, and this isn't commonly understood, I don't believe, but women often find themselves bored in sex faster than men do. And I find that it's the sex that they're having is what they're bored with. I don't know if your listeners are looking for a tip, but online they could consider Googling or looking on my Instagram, but it's a yes, no, maybe list, where it gives you creative options. So if you are that partner that is really excitable and wanting to experience novelty and different ways of connecting, there are those lists so that you can feel okay with being too much or too little.
And what would you say to couples who, may have some sort of this disagreement, I suppose, or non-alignment over a certain issue? For example, I can think of something off the top of my head with one particular couple where the guy, he really liked to have the woman talk about fantasies and what in his inverted commas dirty talk, if you like, but she wasn't comfortable with that and it didn't really turn her on.
I understand that's a wonderful kind of scenario to present because that's very common. I think there is this idea of always be willing in my practice, and you may not be wanting to engage in quote unquote dirty talk with your partner. However, there could be curiosity of what about this dirty talk turns you on? Could the partner get that dirty talk through an audio uh, story, such as, gosh, there's a service, I can't remember the app, but there's sexual audio books that can bring about that eroticism that maybe he's seeking. There are opportunities in meeting halfway, I believe, when it comes to preferences in the bedroom and understanding and being curious, I think is really important. How does that land? Does that sound relatable or
Absolutely.
actionable?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing, the thing you touched on there was, probably listening to eroticism on an audiobook or something like that might be preferable for the woman and get her more excited than probably having to speak herself, maybe, it's a bit of a compromise. And also, maybe, depending on how you've been brought up, I think a lot of it is to do with shame around certain words and how people put their own meaning on it. But referring to it as dirty talk can make you feel probably uncomfortable as well, rather than talking about, what do you enjoy? What are your fantasies?
Absolutely. And I can't remember if I said quote unquote, but for viewers who can only hear me right now, absolutely dirty talk was in quotes because it is a beautiful way to connect through language and sexuality. So yeah, it's exploring comfortability and absolutely what it is they were brought up with. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, I do feel that quite often a barrier to us really getting a lot of more pleasure out of sex, especially for women, I would say, it is around shame that might be attached to it due to upbringing or our own personal experiences.
Absolutely. And I know you may relate to this with your background on your podcast and trauma. I know carries a lot in relationships, and that's something that I certainly experience in my practice and the partners that my men share with. Yeah.
So, do you primarily work with men, Fran, or is
I
it couples?
I do. I primarily work with men. I believe that we teach people how to treat us and we teach people how to have sex with us. So my goal is to give them everything that I know. It's to help them understand themselves better, and then they can go off and create the sex lives that they've wanted. And it's so important with compulsive sexual behaviors because just because you have an attachment or a compulsory action towards sex or porn, it doesn't mean that you can't have your own sexuality.
No.
So it is relearning their own sex so that they can enjoy sex themselves.
Absolutely. I love that you're working with men because not many women do work with men. And I feel that, that you're doing a fantastic job, by the way, of
Thanks.
actually educating men about what women want and desire because they probably only hear it from other guys.
Yes, and I'm a rape survivor, and in college I was raped, and I, went through all the statistics of depression, mental health disorders, medical issues, all the things. And when I came out of that, I realized that the hurt hurt. And I it is my job. I find it to be my sole purpose to teach men how to treat women in the bedroom. Whether they're, confusing consent with compliance, whatever that looks like. I really think it is important that we teach men how to see their penis and with wisdom and knowledge rather than for it to be a threat to them.
And is that what got you into this industry in the first place and made you want to do what you're doing today?
Absolutely. Coming back into myself after all those years after being raped, I also got back into advocacy and volunteering, and I have answered a rape crisis hotline for 3 years. I've done hospital advocacy. I've worked in food scarcity, or I volunteered in food scarcity, housing scarcity, human trafficking at Tampa International Airport. I have realized that men are struggling, and not in the way of weakness, but of opportunity. And I really think that a regulated man is safer than any weapon we sell in the name of protection. And I find that sex and regulation is very important to the betterment of men.
Absolutely. And what are your thoughts about creating polarity in a relationship? And in other words, how big a part do you feel it plays for us to understand how to be in our feminine as a woman and how to be in a healthy masculine as a man? And I mean, there are unhealthy versions of feminine and masculine, but there is the healthy side of being in our healthy feminine as well as the healthy side of being in our healthy masculine in a man.
I understand. Thank you for your question. And I think you had a podcaster or a guest on here talking about the masculine and feminine. And in sex, I like to relate it sort of to power dynamics and understanding how those power dynamics play out in our sexuality and our relationships, understanding what it is we are bringing forth. I think our attachments affect how it is we show up. I think how we're raised affects our masculine and feminine, how we show up. Again, and in regards to your question, can you help me focus in on a helpful response for the masculine and feminine?
Yeah, I
Like
myself an educator around creating polarity in relationships because I do feel that I suppose since burning the bra days and active feminism and women
I
becoming
love it.
more independent, we've stepped a lot more into masculine energy. And certainly if we have been, assaulted at the hands of a man, whether that's childhood abuse or sexual assaults or whatever it might be, it's quite easy for us to default into masculine energy and be wanting to have the power in a relationship, wanting to be in control of everything because, we felt unsafe in those moments where we've experienced that negativity. And then quite often what happens is that it affects our future relationships because if we're standing in our masculine energy, most of the time, then quite often what we're attracting is either a feminine man who isn't what we find attractive, or we're attracting a masculine man who may not be interested in us long term because he's feeling challenged by that masculine energy because he feels like there's two men in the room with him.
100%, 100%. Yes, I think many of us in the culture are learning that how we've showed up maybe in past relationships outside of our maybe role as feminine or role as masculine hasn't served us. I certainly know that in my previous relationship when I was married, I tried to quote unquote wear the pants in the relationship because I lacked the necessary attachments with my ex-husband. I lacked the security with my ex-husband. So a lot of these things are not, I don't believe, learned, when we're little people, when we're kids. And it seems that we all do this wave of understanding. We all have this sort of come to Jesus moment where we see wow, the way that I was showing up in this relationship was not all that helpful. And I think it's really um I think too, there's so much flexibility in masculine and feminine that we don't give. So if one partner isn't great at making reservations for a restaurant, but they're really great at planning trips, then, maybe one partner steps up in that way. But I think it's communication. It's not assigning roles without talking about it. It's having expectations and understanding it.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like there doesn't necessarily have to like be specifically pink and blue roles, so to speak. Because men can make great chefs and want to be in the kitchen, so to speak, as well as women can probably be quite handy when it comes to DIY, maybe. But I suppose it's in the way we interact with our partner that can either be more softer or quite controlling and quite hard without us realizing we're actually defaulting into that masculine energy of doing that.
100% and allowing the lead. So I'm speaking from a woman's point of view, but allowing that lead versus not. And I certainly did not allow my ex-husband to lead. And there was problems because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was my sort of distinction in the way I explain how masculine and feminine energy works. And there is some positive sides to women stepping into masculine energy. For example, if we are in a threatening environment where there is potential danger, then obviously there is a need then to be assertive or react in a fight or flight mode to keep us safe. Or if we're in even a sporting competitive environment, for example, we will need to step into more masculine energy to compete and be competitive, because when we're in our feminine, we're in a more collaborative state. So those are my distinctions between what's healthy masculine and what's healthy feminine within all of us, speaking from the woman's perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you for the conversation. I really I enjoyed that and I learned from this.
So what do you find has been a really common theme between what men don't know about women?
Yes, one major thing, and I was talking to my mom this weekend about it, is wet doesn't equal ready.
Right.
Yeah, so when it comes to penetrative sex, it's really coming out, research is coming out that 20% of women, there's a sexual concordance. So 20% of women actively create genital secretions in response to their psychological, their physiological matches their psychological when it comes to being turned on. And our bodies as women naturally prepare for penetration, whether we consent to it, whether we want it or not. And what happens is when men are turned on, they immediately have something to show for it, right? They have an erection for the most
Yes.
part,
Yeah.
right? For the most part. And so the assumption is, oh, this vagina owner has something to show for it too, and that's wetness. However, 80% of the time, that's not the case. So we can kind of take us back to that spontaneous responsive desire. So that framework. So if you assume that the woman is more responsive in desire, you know that she needs some lead up, she needs some coaxing, maybe not coaxing, but she needs some sort of stimulation there,
Yes.
right?
More foreplay.
So, yeah, more foreplay. So if you are, 5 minutes in messing around and you sense that your girl's wet, 80% of the time, she's probably not as wet and excited as she could be. So I do think that men definitely confuse wetness for readiness. And that is, across the board, consensual, not consensual, being in a rape crisis hotline for 3 years and being a hospital advocate, that is something that is a very important to talk about because the survivors themselves often think, why the heck was I wet during that moment? I wasn't turned on. Why did my body betray me? And it's like, oh, no, no, no. This is your body trying to support you. It's trying to help you. But anyways, getting back to that, your question, I think men, that would be very helpful if men understood that.
Wow, we need to get this in schools, don't we?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Because when it comes to sex education, we're not taught, anything around these sorts of topics like attachments, how trauma might affect our relationships, how even, like you say, wetness in terms of being turned on affects whether you're ready to have sex as a woman. The sex education in schools is more about, preventing babies, isn't it?
100% and avoiding it. And you hear half the women who are of, quote unquote, baby making age and responsible age to have a baby still scared to death to have a baby when it's time because it's just been ingrained that sex produces babies and that's it, not pleasure.
And it's quite sad there, I suppose, to you know, think that teachers or whoever is responsible for biology classes and sex education aren't bringing in experts like ourselves to talk about this with our young adults.
I know, and I'm not sure why sex, our bodies are not inherently sexual. That we live in this puritanical society that's over sexualized. So it's avoiding, to me, it's avoiding the elephant in the room all the time. And we are sexual beings. I mean, our innate state without all this crap in the world is pleasure. It's joy, it's calm. So I believe that we, need to be learning, of course, need to be learning about our pleasure systems, the erotic nervous system that we carry.
Yeah, because I do feel it, probably mostly for guys and young men, especially, and boys in high school, they get in their sex education online, aren't they, through watching porn?
Yes, and we're finding porn is not instructions, it's ideas. But that, that's so hard to realize as a young person who, really wants to feel connected. And I believe that the penis is the conduit for male emotion. So that men naturally would like to relate to partners through their penis. So I think they should learn about themselves absolutely far sooner than they do, and not through porn. It's not the most helpful, though it is lovely and erotic, and you can see different types of bodies on there, and there's different experiences you can consider. And it does, porn, when men have access to porn, rape is decreases. So there are certainly major benefits to porn. However, when it's used as instructions and not ideas, things are not helpful in that capacity.
No, not at all. And I feel it's a shame because, you know, um, I actually can remember when I was younger, I was in my mid-20s, I had a date. Well, I was dating a guy who was 30, who was a virgin. And you could tell his only references came from watching porn just by the way he talked, and it was quite offensive to me, the language he used, when he was talking about
All right.
sex. And that's why we broke up actually, because I just found it, ooh, does he think I'm some sort of porn star the way he's talking?
Right.
So, and it just goes to show that how much it can influence your external relationships, because that's all you know, how, in terms of what sex is like.
I understand, and that kind of brings us back to your scenario that you brought up about how the man wanted the woman to talk, quote unquote, dirty talk, and how she wasn't comfortable, and how we talk about, leading with curiosity. Why is it that that partner at that time demanded that of you, or you felt so uncomfortable in that? That's what we want to know. And if he learned that from porn, that is just not a helpful way of connecting with you.
100%. And I don't know how it can be rectified, but I do hope our young men of today are not going to be, too influenced by thinking that, this is the way sex has got to be because this is the way I've watched it and how I want it to be in my intimate relationship. But also, I think it can be, like you say, it can be a positive experience to watch porn, and especially if you're doing it together. But also to think to yourself, is this reality? Which it isn't, is it? And not to compare yourself to the guys in the porn videos, or women as women, comparing yourself to, the body shapes of the women in these adult education, supposedly, films.
Right. And they say that men's penises in porn are up to more than 2 inches bigger in length, I'm sure diameter too, than the average penis size. So yeah, absolutely.
Because that could have a crisis, expectation on the guys themselves. They could feel not up to the job and being judged for the size, and it might be perfectly normal.
100%. You're so right. It's a catch-22. It can be supportive in ways and it can be very harmful.
So, Fran, what is the best contact information you can give our listeners should they want to find out more about you and connect with you?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This went, I was so nervous getting started and this went well. I really appreciate you creating a great space for me. As far as contacting me, my website, please. It's Fran Frye, FRYE.com. That's a great website for me. And I think you said you'll include it in the show notes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And finally, any words of wisdom around this topic of the differences in desires between men and women that you'd like to share before we close the episode?
I think communication is lubrication.
Ooh.
And yeah, communication is lubrication. And being able to communicate your sex life. Dr. Emily, Sex with Emily, often talks about timing, tone, and turf. So you want to be in a good mood. You want to be at your kitchen table. You don't want to be having sex when you're talking about sex. So I think using communication as lubrication and really getting honest with one another. Books are a great resource too. And podcasts, connecting, sending this podcast to your loved one is great too. But yeah, communication is lubrication.
Absolutely. And if you're not a reader of books, most books these days do the audio versions as well. So that there's no excuse really, is there?
You're so right. I'm an Audible addict. Yep.
Well, thank you so much, Fran. It's been delightful to have you on, and hopefully you'll come on again as a guest in the future. And I really found this topic really fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all that you do as well for advocacy. I appreciate it, Lyn.
So it just leaves me to say that true love starts with opening our hearts. And until next time, goodbye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Hearts Entwined podcast. You can follow Lyn via the Facebook group Two Hearts Entwined, or search Lyn Smith, inspirational speaker, at LinkedIn, or email lyn@hearts-entwined.com. That's LYN@hearts-entwined.com. Remember, true love starts with opening our hearts.